Good afternoon and welcome to, or well, I guess there might be some folks calling from the morning or the evening. So good whatever time it is in your time zone. I'm Dr. Joanne Yanez. Welcome to today's AANMC webinar, Spring Clean Your Life, Detox 101 with Dr. Furtado. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of housekeeping. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, we ask that you please use the Q&A component so that we can track your questions and make sure we don't miss anything. The recording will be shared when it is ready. And if you do have any questions or experiencing any issues, feel free to email us at info@aanmc.org. And also, if you have any issues. Cheryl, I see your hand is raised. If you can use the Q&A function, that would be fabulous. Next slide. So with us today is Dr. Furtado. Dr. Furtado received her naturopathic degree at Bastyr University in Washington, also holding a Bachelor of Science in Biology from GW in Washington, D.C. And so with that, I am going to turn this over to Dr. Furtado to talk about Detox. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Just to cover our small disclosure here, it's all of our information here is not meant to provide any medical advice. And I'd like to share a little bit more about my affiliations and my work. I am an executive board member for the National Association of Environmental Medicine, or NAEM. I'm in my second year of service with that organization. I've also been a member of the AANP since 2001 when I was first starting practice. I'm a founding director of a local organization that provides school garden programming to elementary children K through 5. And I'm also author of an ebook that is published by Integrative Practitioner. It is owned by them and available free as a member benefit through their website. And it is all about clinical detoxification. Just a small little piece of information about our nonprofit organization. I hope to share a little bit more detail with you by the end of the hour and have resources for you. But the NAEM is an affiliate association of the AANP. It is mostly comprised of clinicians, including naturopaths, as well as other credentialed licensed physicians, with a focus on the practice of environmental medicine. And there are many free resources available to the public and clinicians, as well as member-only resources that we try to share with our interested folks. So a little agenda so we get an idea of what we're going to try to cover today. I will work on presenting all the information, and if you have any questions, I am so excited to hear about them at the end of our talk. So we will wait till the end to go through questions. So I appreciate your patience with that process. All right, so as you are aware, naturopathic medicine is a distinct form of practice. It is not just a set of remedies, but it's governed by principles that help us create clinical outcomes for our patients in a thoughtful and methodical way, using the innate power of the body to heal and focused on natural remedies. This is a wonderful infographic that's actually put out by AANMC. I would honestly agree to tell you that I love this infographic because I give it to each one of my patients. Been in practice since 2001, and I used to do this work. I felt like somewhat on a silo in my own mind with my patients, but I actually put it in my first office call paperwork on purpose because I'm really working to help empower patients to understand their role in their healthcare. So I'm going to go over it with you briefly just to help us understand how it relates to detoxification, and that'll tie in together as we move forward. And I'm hoping many of you have seen this already because it's a wonderful tool. And sometimes I tell my patients, of course, it's a beautiful infographic, but it's a whole system of practice that we study intensively when we're in training. And it is not just a thought of, oh, that's an interesting idea. It's like, the core of our foundational work. So as we understand, the top of the pyramid is where we're working when we're trying to suppress pathology. There is a time and a place for some of these high force interventions, such as drugs and pharmacy. But we do picture it at the top of the pyramid kind of on purpose, because it's a little bit more of the top layer of creating change in an interventionist type of strategy. We can also provide symptom relief that might be synthetic or natural. And we also might hopefully address any physical alignment issues, such as structural um, integral issues to the body, as part of our restorative work. But as a naturopath and as someone focused on detoxification, I like to remind that all that work really does happen at the bottom of the pyramid. And we're going to go into more deep understanding of how the determinants of health, almost all of them, interrelate with detoxification 101, in my opinion. But the real special sauce about naturopathic medicine is about really working and using remedies and using practice to help stimulate the body's own healing and aid those damaged organs. Of course, I like to have a little phrase that I say: we don't treat symptoms, we treat systems. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. The bottom of that pyramid, I just reiterated these determinants of health. All of us are very much influenced by these generally identified 8 determinants of health. I think when most people are thinking about being healthier, we work on these first 3: sleep, nutrition, hydration, and their stress management. I think that's a really great way to be preventative in healthcare. But part of our naturopathic understanding brings us to the point where we have to address our microorganisms. We have to look at our environmental pollutant burden. I would say exercise and movement is kind of common knowledge as well. Relationships and networks, social fabric, and our trauma histories are also informing our capacity to be vibrantly well. And so when we are applying naturopathic principles, we are automatically including our environmental medicine principles, because we're assessing and understanding how do environmental pollutants affect our body's ability to be capable of being vibrantly healthy. So what has liver got to do with it? My joy is kind of being a nerd about liver function. I brought in this little reminder. I don't know if anyone can bring their mind's eye to this reference, but there's some Greek mythology in which Prometheus was kind of feeling sad for us humans and provided us the gift of fire. Apparently, Zeus was not too happy about that and tied poor Prometheus to a rock, where he was cursed to being attacked every day by a bird of prey who would eat out his liver, and it would grow back the next day. Kind of grotesque, but a reminder of the capacity for regeneration that the liver really has. And I find that that is part of why I think naturopathic medicine really does focus on restoring weakened systems. And many times clinical success really happens when you actually focus on restoring liver function. I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. And I had wanted to mention a little bit of my luck, or my blessing, of having the honor to be a student at Bastyr University when Dr. Bill Mitchell, who was one of the founding doctors of Bastyr, was a professor. And I loved being in class with him. He was a wealth of clinical information. He would often just sit and chat with us about his cases, and we would learn so much. And one of his famous phrases that I remember the most is that he said, in any complex case, when in doubt, detoxify, which is another way of saying support liver function. Okay, so what is detoxification? I know that it's all the rage on social media and all kinds of layers of products that are on sale, but let's kind of look a little deeper at what we understand detoxification to be, and then we'll jump in a little bit further. So in my opinion, it's a time-honored practice amongst all medical systems on our planet. We have cultural practices that are rooted in detoxification or purification rites, including things like indigenous cultures who have, sweat lodge and other herbal work that is clearly supporting organs of elimination. We have fasting that are tied to religious or spiritual practice. We also have clinical detoxification that's embedded in almost all the medical systems, such as Chinese medicine, naturopathic, Western Hippocrates with the four humors. So most modern medicine is not necessarily focused on detoxification, but I would say in all fairness, almost all other medical systems that have kind of evolved on the planet have a very tight root into aiding the organs of elimination. And of course, detoxification can also just be considered certain habits or personal care that we do at home. It can be as simple as not using unnatural products in our household, switching to non-toxic products like cosmetics and food and so forth. So I think in some ways, even though our talk is called Detox 101, there really could be considered 101 different ways to do detoxification work. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the science of that. I brought in a few different graphics to talk about the phases of detoxification. And I want to share like a little bit more background on that. So phase one, they talk about, it's more of an activation or kind of a transformation, a biotransformation that happens in the liver cell. And phase two is another process that has to do with biotransforming that molecule, which I'm going to talk a little bit more detail in the next slide. But phase three is a little bit more described in this slide, and I wanted to start with that because phase three is once that molecule is biotransformed, we have to count on these organs of elimination, such as liver, such as kidney, and such as the GI tract, to help us make sure that these molecules safely and effectively move out of the body. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I try to kind of walk us through it enough so that you understand some of the other things we talk about later in this hour. When we talk about detoxification, we almost want to ask the question, well, what is it we're trying to detoxify? So there are endotoxins. Endo, kind of from the Latin root, means like from within. So there's end products of metabolism and bacterial endotoxins, really even the byproduct of respiration, carbon dioxide and ammonia, uric acid, these kinds of things, as well as bacteria. The normal flora have various things that they will excrete that our body normally is involved with just clearing, including our steroid hormones. And then we have exotoxins, meaning from outside the body. And this list can be quite long, and we're going to focus on this a little bit more on other slides, but these are the places where the industrial toxicants and drugs and household pollutants and also some microbial byproducts will come in. So we don't have to worry so much about all the busyness in this slide, but let's talk about the journey of a toxin. Most toxins are lipid soluble, so they are not going to be readily removed from the system because we really rely on a water soluble toxin to be able to move around from cell to cell. So sometimes these lipid soluble toxins are going to be stuck in our fat or other tissue, including bone, as well as other muscles and organs, mostly adipose. But in the detoxification process, we're working on mobilizing those toxins out of their stored location. When the toxin is in the bloodstream, it can be affected by liver cells. And in the liver cell, there's a set of enzymes called the cytochrome P450 enzyme system. There is phase one, where we literally are kind of breaking a molecule into pieces. Those intermediate metabolites are more water soluble, but they're also chemically unstable. And so they have a more capacity to cause free radical damage. We should be following phase one with phase two, where we basically grab or escort that molecule further along the process. Once that molecule has been conjugated, it can now be excreted. So once it's in the bloodstream in that format, it can be filtered through the kidneys and it can be loaded into the bile, and the stool will carry it out the rest of the way. This little section under phase two, the way I describe this is a little bit like if you're heading to the DMV department or a toll booth where you're having a lane to pick through, like to get through to the other side. Now, toxicants don't get to just decide what lane they want to go through. Toxicants basically will pick the lane or the pathway of phase two conjugation based on their chemical structure. So many of the volatile organic compounds, as well as certain pesticides and organophosphates, they're going to usually go through some glutathione conjugation, whereas perhaps we think about heavy metals, they will go through glucuronidation and methylation, and steroid hormones as well will go through methylation. So the nature of the chemical kind of dictates how it's going to leave the building. And there are certain nutritional deficiencies or even genomic or individualized, I guess, challenges that patients have with phase 2 conjugation pathways that might limit their ability to clear certain compounds. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I wanted to give you a little bit of the basics of where are these molecules going and how are they getting removed. All right, so the 3 phases of detoxification. I'm not going to sit and look at this slide with you, but I left it in there because I thought it was a little more detailed. So if you do end up getting the slide deck and want to read, this is a little bit more nicely written out, explaining what I worked on, just trying to explain just now. Okay, so in honor of Dr. Mitchell, I wanted to put some of these slides in here. This is not something I'm going to go diving deeply into with you, but it's a nice little list of all the different functions of the liver. And I'm going to try to kind of make that tie to our clinical indications as to why certain conditions and certain clinical presentations are going to indicate a need for detoxification. And most of them all tie back to liver function. So when we think about optimizing liver function, of course, we think of the idea that I just went through, that the body removes toxins and toxicants through its filtration process. A lot of that happens through the cytosine P450 enzyme system. And I wanted to cover a little bit about first pass effect. Many people may be somewhat familiar with this because of our society is pretty commonly understanding that, for example, a drug, let's say a drug has a therapeutic value at 100 milligrams, but the first pass effect is about 20 milligrams. So we know the dose of that drug needs to be 120 milligrams. So what the first pass effect really indicates is how the liver will clear a substance out of the bloodstream at a pretty, like a determined rate, if that makes sense. So I'll go back to some of that liver focused physiology. One of the other things I love to remind folks about liver is that it's the only organ in our body that actually has a dual incoming blood supply. Most organs have the incoming arterial blood supply, which is rich, oxygenated, nutrient-laden blood. And then as the capillary bed then switches and drains out of that organ, we have the vein leaving and heading back to the heart. Now, the liver is the only organ that actually has 2 incoming blood supplies. It, of course, has its arterial blood, but it also has the venous drainage from the entire digestive tract, which means that anything you absorb, anything that you've eaten, anything that you've ingested through your stomach, your small intestine, even your large intestine, all of that goes to the liver first through the vein, the hepatic vein. And the artery and the hepatic vein kind of enter the liver together anatomically, and it floods the cavernous structure of the liver. And we'll talk a little bit more about why stress and tension can sometimes restrict the arterial flow, which kind of jacks up or imbalances the hepatic vein that's flowing into the liver and makes the toxic assault of what you've just ingested even harder for liver function. And that's a role in which stress plays in detoxification. But that first pass effect is a really important concept, and it's just a reminder about how primary and how elevated of a statue, I guess you'd say, like, honorable place that the liver's in as far as physiology goes, because nothing gets into the body without the liver getting a look at it first. And that's what we call the first pass effect. So as we look at some of these other functions that I'm just going to briefly go through, we can understand that other things that the liver does has a hand in, beyond simply just clearing things through that first pass effect and all the other passes that the bloodstream might come through liver. We also know that it's creating proteins that helps us carry our hormones and our enzymes and our vitamins throughout the whole system. It's making our bile, which is very critical for absorbing our fats. It's metabolizing our hormones, including the peripheral conversion of thyroid hormone is very dependent on liver. And so sometimes we have some subclinical or hypothyroid symptoms but the lab work looks pretty good, we want to look to liver, because it may be that the liver is just not activating the thyroid hormone, and the obstacle there are toxic burden or environmental pollutants. Processing glucose and managing blood sugar. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to clinical indications. Regulating all our amino acids, so it relates to depression and mood and neurotransmitters, as well as all these other functions have a hand in heart disease, immune function, as well as basically just storing and distributing all of our nutrients. So we talked a little bit about on one other slide about what are all different toxins. I wanted to go a little bit more detail, providing you the idea of internal toxins, kind of like endotoxins on the chart, lifestyle toxicants, things that are in products that we're purchasing or ingesting. And then, of course, our favorite idea of being humans who stand on this planet and don't always honor the beauty of this planet, we're making a lot of environmental toxins, and they run the gamut from all different types of different molecules. I will bring our attention to a resource that I use daily called the Collaborative on Health and the Environment. They have a disease and database, a disease and toxicant database that's searchable. These next slides, in a minute, I'll get to what that search engine looks like. But this is another graphic reminding us of all of the classes of chemicals that are provided to our bodies through the glory of science and better living through chemistry here. We talk about persistent organic pollutants. Unfortunately, they do not biotransform through the cytosine P450 enzyme system. This is part of why they're considered persistent. So we don't know how they get out of us once they come in. So these things are more concerning and very difficult to clear. So avoidance of these compounds are primary importance. We also have pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers of all kinds of flavors, as we might think through. Things like glyphosate, another common name of that is Roundup. Pyrethroid insecticides are often used when people want to kill the mice or the rodents running under their house, and we end up killing a lot of the birds of prey because they're eating their pyrethroid insecticides. We have all our plastics and lots of layers of places in our world that we are ingesting plastics. Unfortunately, the more we study, the more we realize they're in us. And I do apologize, this chart should read solvents and VOCs is the next category. So these VOCs are usually from petroleum-based compounds and have a propensity to upregulate phase 1 enzymes and kind of create a balance in phase 1 and phase 2. And then we have a nice little list of a bunch of different toxicant metals. Some of the more famous things like arsenic and mercury and lead are very pervasive in our environment. So the database, I just wanted to bring these slides in because this is a searchable database. You literally could get to their site, click on select a disease, and you'd get a litany of diseases to choose from. Sorry, I went past to the next slide. And then you can also look at a toxicant, and you will generate a list of diseases that are associated with that toxicant. All right, so if we move forward to thinking about what are reasons that we will know, oh, this person needs to detoxify, or I am in need of some detoxification work. I listed here a few different symptoms that might lead us to understand that the liver is not working at its ideal rate. That can include anything from fluctuations in our energy. Sometimes neurotoxicity can actually trigger insomnia, digestive disturbances for sure. Most times if I have a patient presenting with some skin conditions, it's most easily resolved simply through some detoxification work and supporting other organs of elimination like liver. I love working with fertility and preconception care because many of these types of chemicals are teratogens and cause harm. So we create a wonderful environment when we identify any type of preconception care as an indication for detoxification. And what is increasingly clear through the literature as we work to understand clinical detoxification, that most chronic illnesses, including some of the top causes of death in our country, such as heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, have distinct epidemiological ties to environmental toxins, and especially for things like heart disease and diabetes, fine particulate matter and air pollution. So this is an excerpt from a tool that the NAEM offers for free to any person who is interested to sign up for our free email list. It is called the Environmental EHQ, Environmental Health Questionnaire, and it's an excellent tool that we've developed over the years that helps a clinician do a thorough environmental intake. So beyond the simple realities that you'll be learning in first and second year medical school of how to take a good clinical history, we also have the ability to ask the right questions to understand patients' potential exposures to certain types and classes of chemicals. And some of these symptoms that are on this list are kind of a telltale sign that the liver is really struggling or there is a burden of a certain type of chemical. Um, in um, in the questionnaire, it talks about a person who might be avoiding caffeine simply because it makes you jittery or cause some insomnia. So we understand there's that response to coffee. I would add to this that even the patient who tells me I can have 5 espressos at dinner and it does not affect my sleep, that is another indication that there's an imbalance in the liver function, which generally technically would indicate that you have upregulated your phase 1 so strongly that as soon as your caffeine hits your cytosine P450 enzymes, it's getting broken down immediately. So you're basically quickly dismantling the effects of caffeine. And that is why you can have 5 espressos at dinner and still sleep like a baby. It is really a sign of liver imbalance. So just wanted to keep this slide in as a placeholder here for us, that there are always going to be some variations to clinical responses to detoxification. And I think this is the art form and the work of practicing environmental medicine, is that every patient is a unique person. There is not a simple route for you to help remove, say, glyphosate from a person's body. You have to take into consideration not only their genetic limitations to being able to biotransform that compound, but also their general health, their degree of exposure, their own diet and nutritional status. And we could probably talk for a longer time about how some patients who might have the same intensity of exposure, let's say we have 2 siblings that have lived next to each other for 50 years and they move to all the same places together, each person might have a very different manifestation of how those toxic exposure is affecting them. So I think I'm going to leave some of these clinical applications for us for review when you look at your slides, but it's just a reminder that these key diseases that we think are so related to lifestyle and diet are also increasingly being identified as being linked to mercury toxicity, as well as persistent organic pollutants and other endocrine disrupting chemicals, and which keeps us in our mind's eye that clinical detoxification is very appropriate for any type of diabetes problems. Oh, I apologize. This is an example of that database that I was showing you earlier. If you searched by condition and looked at diabetes type 2, it generates a type of list like this. In all fairness, I think mercury is going to be getting on this list very soon. So here we get to general principles. If this is the only take-home point about how to do clinical detoxification, it would be the slide. Really, it is the bee's knees of how to help keep your liver happy. I would say 8 to 10 glasses of filtered water is actually kind of low, but I try to be kind of agreeable to the basic standard idea. Keep your bowels moving, eat organic things so you're not bringing in the pesticides. 8 to 10 servings of colorful fruits and vegetables. Now, half a cup of most fruits and vegetables is considered 1 serving. So we're really talking about it at minimum a cup of vegetables at every meal, plus 2 to 3 more fruit servings a day. And as you can read through, these are all very commonly prescribed ideas within whole foods or naturopathic circles. What I can highlight for you in the next few minutes is our principles of how to go about healthy detoxification. These are 5 very complex but yet simple concepts. First one being identify and remove the toxins. It makes sense if you're working to detoxify to not continually expose yourself and ingest those chemicals that you're trying to get out of your body. So we work on reviewing product and household and food choices and review any potential sources of toxicants. I often will use body burden assessments to help me guide a patient in that work, where we do some assessments to understand if there are any toxicants that are at high levels. And I'm just referencing the questionnaire again that I gave you a little excerpt of, because these are some of the tools that really help a patient understand and navigate their capacity to avoid um, um, the exposures. This is another excerpt. I think this is the heavy metal section, where we can have a patient kind of walk through and think through their likelihood of exposure and these various activities in the day-to-day living, or locational like issues related to if they lived at certain places. Helps us trigger better inquiry as to what type of testing we might need to do. And there are many ways to do testing. That in and of itself could easily be an hour lecture, and is, I think, a little bit beyond the scope of our lecture today. But I just want to keep in mind that there is not a test where we can just say, hey, laboratory, tell us what chemicals are in this person's body. I wish that were the case. Sometimes we have to play a go fish game, is kind of how I joke to my patients, where we have to say, do you have a 7? Do you have glyphosate? Yes or no? Do you have heavy metals? Yes or no? And sometimes we can look at other tests that help us give insight to our detoxification status. And so I've listed some of those out here for us to understand. There's many ways for us to understand liver's function, and it's not always as direct as just one test. All right, so step 2 of the healthy detoxification is really about identifying how the liver is optimized. And in a stressed environment, in a high pace fight or flight or sympathetic overdrive, the liver is really going to downregulate a lot of its functions. It's kind of, the way I describe it is kind of like us when we have projects. If one of them is due by 4th of July and one of them is due by Christmas, we all know which one we're going to focus on. So sometimes things like converting your thyroid hormone or doing some of those other several listed out ideas about what liver function is are sometimes downregulated because of the presence of a high level of toxicant, and the body says, well, this has to get rid of right now, and I'm going to focus on that. And it starts to drop the ball on some of its other tasks, if that makes sense. And when the adrenal gland is overstimulated and the sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive, the liver will respond to that by downregulation. And so when we want to detoxify a patient, one of my first, I guess, threshold testing is an assessment of their stress management and their hormone status, because an adrenally fatigued person does not clear their toxicants very well. And they are more likely going to be the patient who calls me because they're having problems with their detox program. They're having side effects. They're having dysregulation and lots of uncontrolled inflammation because their adrenal glands are dysregulated. So I think as a prerequisite to good detoxification work, we want to make sure that the nervous system is in a parasympathetic state. And that means rest, digest, repair are activated. And I always like to add detoxify. Rest, digest, repair, and detox. That is the parasympathetic function, and it gets shut off when we're doing fight or flight. So this is where we work with the patient with their relaxation, their unconscious behaviors. It's not unlike me to invite a patient into a detoxification process at a stage of life of transition, whether they're having recently been through divorce, not in the midst of things, but as a recovery process after divorce or death or loss, or even just a change in life. It's sometimes a wonderful thing to go through a detox process because you're making room for getting rid of the old and getting in with the new. So step 3 is all about nourishing. Okay. If the liver is, if anything, we understand from that phase 1, phase 2 diagram is that it's a very nutrient laden process. B vitamins, amino acids, antioxidant dependent pathways. So if a patient is having like a standard American diet where they might be getting 1/2 cup of vegetables at dinner, they are really not a candidate for successful detoxification. And we have to work with step 3. We have to work with nourishing them before we work on trying to move those toxicants. Or then the story is much ado about nothing. Those chemicals don't leave if all the pathways that are required to help move them are deficient. And so this is part of why we remove anti-nutrients and bring in nutrient-dense foods, which in and of itself is a form of detoxification. If a patient wanted to say, hey, I want to detoxify, I'm going to do something like the allergy elimination diet or Whole30 or the virgin diet, step 3 alone can provide an amazing rest or vacation for the liver. Remember that first pass effect? If you're getting rid of anti-nutrients like sugar and like caffeine and alcohol, you're basically giving that liver a little bit of a breath of fresh air. It's going to be able to do more of its job because it's not getting bombarded with all these other chemicals that it needs to detoxify. So step 3 is often a very fundamental way where culturally medical systems really work. And it does a lot of good job. The main reason I keep people off of seafood during treatment, again, I'm not saying you should never have any seafood, but seafood is actually, the oceans are very polluted, microplastics, heavy metals in particular. So it's kind of the same metaphor of like, hey, if I want a white carpet and I'm going to clean my carpet, I am not going to be vacuuming and shampooing while I'm also letting the construction worker walk over my carpet with the muddy boot. So really that abstention from known sources of toxicants is really helpful during a detox process. And I left that slide in just for information and beauty, but we're going to move a little forward. Just a reminder, eating a rainbow is part of how you get step 3 to be the most efficient. Variety is always a wonderful tool in nutrition. Now, step 4, that relates back to my diagram where I initially started that story, and I talked about how these fat-soluble toxicants tend to stay in our tissue because they're not water-soluble and they're not moving around and getting biotransformed. So step 4 has to do with enhancing blood and lymphatic circulation. My general prescription is make sure you're sweating at least 3 times a week profusely, and exercise counts. But part of my argument is that people who do exercise regularly don't necessarily have no persistent pollutants in them or no glyphosate residues. So I think the naturopathic techniques that bring that lymphatic cleanse a little bit more effective than simply exercise are really important for this step. And so the inexpensive ways to do them at home are things like Epsom salt baths, castor oil packs, and wet sheet wraps, which is a wonderful old naturopathic water cure that we teach in school that has to do with stimulating vital force and allowing that purge to happen through the lymph system. You can also have therapies such as colonic hydrotherapies and lymphatic massages that promote step 4. And I would say my most favorite and I think the best researched is a sauna. Sauna therapy can be wide, it can be steam, it can be dry sauna, it can be infrared. Infrared tends to be more tolerated and a little deeper detoxification on a cellular level, in my opinion, but they all do wonderful things with mobilizing those stored toxins and say, like they say at the pub, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Now we have step 5, which is optimize the detox liver system. This is where the naturopathic medical training really shines. We are working on step 5 to nourish and strengthen phase 1 and phase 2. We're targeting and we're learning about that patient's capacities, about those DMV lanes. We're including chelation agents as indicated or needed, and we're really supporting phase 3, which is the elimination of the compounds after they've been biotransformed. And there's so much secret sauce in here. This is where the training in environmental medicine really makes that effective medicine a lot more, environmental medicine makes you a little bit more effective in optimizing the liver's capacity to do what it needs to do. But remember, it's step 5. It's one of the steps of many other things that can be done without a lot of technical nuances. So I put together a small list. I think it's a great springboard of resources for folks to learn more about this work, including, Joe Pizzorno's simple article. This article is nice. It's not long. It's not like a big investment of time. The Toxin Solution, I consider a wonderful book. It's written for the public, but I consider it a master class on how to clean out the house and get things right. And then some of these online resources that have a tremendous number of fact sheets and information and resources of things like picking the best water filter, the best air filter, and other supplies in the household. And just a little reminder about the NAEM. We welcome everyone to join our mailing list and receive some free resources. And you can also consider to become a member. We have plans for a supporting member if you're not a physician, and a student member as well. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about the organization. It's a nonprofit, like I described. I list out a couple of our partners. We have several beyond just these two, but the Academy AEEM is another nonprofit organization that also has a focus on environmental medicine. And the EMEI was started through Walter Crinian and Lynn Patrick, who are really wonderful naturopathic doctors who specialize in environmental medicine. And this is postdoctorate training that's available. How are we doing on time? I think we're doing all right. I will happily answer any questions. And I would say, just looking forward, for me, I'm excited to be networked with ANMC through this resource. I love learning about new doctors and folks who are entering the profession, because I feel sometimes that I've been around so long that I don't always know all the things I should know. So I guess one of my advice pearls for prospective students is to continue to stay networked. I probably could do better myself. I live in an unlicensed state and I've been in practice for 20 years, so I can also answer questions about moving to a place that is pre-licensed, as we say. I think that's the end of our story. All right, well, thank you for your time, and we can open up. Let me know if there are any questions that I can field.
Thank you, Dr. Furtado. Before we go to Q&A, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I just wanted to let folks know about upcoming events in May. We will be continuing on this detoxification vein and talking about fertility. I believe Dr. Furtado talked about detox as one of the first things she also does when patients are having issues around fertility. And then in June, we will have an alumni panel where you can ask them whatever you are burning and what's burning in your brain. So you can go back to your contacts or the ANMC contact, either one. And so with that, we have some questions that have come in, Dr. Furtado, regarding your talk here. So there were two questions that came in about water. And what do you recommend for water filtration? Is Brita okay? What do you tell folks about who are wanting to have those 8 to 10 glasses of filtered water?
Oh, that's a good question. So the way to filter water is a little bit similar to how the way that we need to detoxify is. First, we have to know what we're dealing with and what are the problems, and then we can know what are the remedies. So some filtration systems are a little more appropriate if you have a municipality source of water, and other filtration systems might be more appropriate if you're working with well water. So I would understand that there might be a better jumping board to Environmental Working Group has a wonderful page that walks people through like an algorithm of like how to understand and discern what the problem is with your water versus what is a good system. I generally, as a rule, do recommend reverse osmosis as my preferred form of water filtration. And the downside is the amount of waste that it provides. Like it forever, I don't remember how it goes, but it's like for every gallon of water that gets filtered, you're wasting several ounces or portions of water. So that's a concern of mine. But I live in Delaware, and we have a water table that is influenced by the river of Delaware and the Chesapeake Bay. And as a landform, we are basically a filtration device for the whole eastern seaboard. So we want to have really good water filtration. Carbon filters like Brita are maybe more appropriate for city water because they mostly just take chlorine and some of the other larger compounds out. They are not going to address certain heavy metals or other um, like pharmaceuticals and things like this that are found in the water. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you so much. So there's another question about pesticides. Now, you talked about eating organic, and even with organic foods, that there are sometimes organic pesticides. Can you talk about any of the burden that may be present with organic foods, produce, dairy, et cetera?
Well, good question. I think the word organic needs the definition to start with that conversation. And it is more, how could I say, it is more loosely defined than maybe some farmers and other activists who believe in regenerative farming would like to see. But generally, if you're certified organic, you have proven to the USDA that you have certain practices on your land that don't involve using high dosages of chemical or petroleum-based pesticides and herbicides. There are some natural types of organic, or they say organic natural pesticides that are used in an organic certified farm. They generally aren't really containing like the petrochemicals and the heavy metals that we see in other fertilizers. So generally, I feel a USDA stamp of approval is a good one with some caveat. And then I also encourage people to get to know their farmers. So they might even prefer a smaller local farm that hasn't gotten a USDA stamp because of the cost of that. But if they can hear from that farmer that they are not spraying and they know what the practices are, that's generally very comfortable for me. But I'm kind of in the farming community in my wheelhouse of where I live, and I also am a school gardener, and my daughter is certified in restorative farming. So I have probably more to say about all of that, but I think in the general thought, organic and purchasing from a large producer of organic is, I think, better than buying conventional produce. So we're really working on shifting practice and looking at the industrial complex of farms before we're really going to get a lot of impact regarding runoff and exposures. You can eat everything organic and make an oasis in your home, but if you're surrounded by farms who are spraying, you're still going to be impacted by their practices. So it's a complex answer. Complex answer to a complex question. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's a question here about sauna. So you had talked a little bit about sweating, and if you have any specific recommendations of red light sauna over traditional sauna, over maybe even things like hot yoga.
Yeah, yeah. So in my research, I have not found that there are studies that really give a lot of ground to understand one form of sauna is better than the other. Generally, more research is on infrared sauna because it has more investment and more published study. But generally, we're seeing that the 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 means in which you provide that sweat or that heating process is not as like nuanced as like as far as effectiveness. I think anything goes and works in my opinion. I'm a huge fan of all the things that you talked about, steam sauna, dry heat, infrared. I personally have an infrared in my home because I feel like it's the most cost effective and easy to manage type of at home sauna. Um, hot yoga is obviously a little bit up level because you're moving and you're doing poses, and you can overdo. So sometimes those really loosened ligaments are, a little more at risk for stretching too much. So I think that's more of an exercise physiology thought than it is a detox thought. But that very concept, moving the body, moving the lymph, kind of like We need that in our lives. This is what's been culturally kind of robbed from us. I think that these practices are in our indigenous cultures, they're in our traditional, um, especially like Korean Turkish bathhouses, Scandinavian countries. These are just parts of how we folks take care of their bodies. And so I really like to think of it like that. This is a tool, just like you might brush your teeth, you have a sauna.
Thank you
But
so
I
much for.
know that I live in my own little world sometimes with that thought.
Well, and I think it's important to recognize the cultural perspectives and that a lot of what naturopathic medicine brings often stems from some of the traditional practices
Mhm.
and connecting to that. We have a couple of questions, and I don't believe we're probably going to be able to get to everything in this format. So apologies to those of you who may have asked questions and might not get answers for all of this. But there was a question here regarding castor oil. So you mentioned castor oil as part of detox. And in general, when you're doing various different types of detox, is there a need to take binders, to take activated charcoal or, flaxseed or any other types of things that may bind things up? If you could speak a little bit to how NDs work to make sure that the toxins that we're releasing don't either get recirculated or deposit somewhere even more harmful.
Yes, and I apologize if I focused more on phase one and phase two in my commentary, but phase three is what you're talking about. And this is the layer of enterohepatic circulation, kind of like that first pass effect that I described, where the everything that gets absorbed from the colon and the gut gets good to the liver first. Same goes the other side as the bile gets excreted into the small intestine. What it needs to do is be able to hand off those conjugated molecules to the next person on the relay, and that's the fiber in your gut. Okay. And so in step 5, there's a small note that reminds that we need binders. Those binders are charcoal and fiber, usually, or some kind of blend related to that type of action. They are usually inert, insoluble. They're not getting absorbed and transmuted into that first pass storyline. They're sitting in the bowel for us, almost like an empty bus waiting for the truckload of tourists to come down and load up and leave. So sometimes if we are failing to attend to step 3, which is that really nutrient rich plant based food, lots of fiber in your actual food that you're eating. And in step 5, always want a binder involved with fiber and charcoal. Those two together will help create the exodus that we're looking for. Okay. Otherwise, you might end up just reabsorbing those toxins because they didn't get basically handed off. If anything, I can impart is that concept that toxicants are kind of wild childs. You cannot hold on to them very well, and the body just puts them in storage because they're like, heck, you got to get out of here, but I don't know what to do with you. Um, and then in the liver, we go, nope, break, hold, grab, and then in the bile, they're like, got to be held too. They're just not allowed to be just running around. They will wreak havoc. They will create cell damage. They will generate oxidative stress and free radicals if they're not escorted. So definitely that binder in the stool is part of that story. But let's not think that if we only take charcoal every night and that's all we do, that we're going to really detoxify a lot. Because remember, you've got to have those toxins in the bile at higher levels for you to actually be really confident that that glyphosate residue or that organophosphate in your fat tissue is leaving. Fiber in the stool is not going to affect that. It's only the end of the story to make sure it leaves after the liver has done its job.
Well,
Hopefully that's helpful.
that is so very helpful. So I recognize we're at time now. We usually like to end these a few minutes early to allow our speakers to go to their next, hourly thing that we all jump through from one to one. So Dr. Furtado, I just want to say a very heartfelt thank you for you to share your knowledge with us. Do you have any parting words for our attendees today and just any final thoughts that you would like to leave folks with who are interested in becoming an ND, in focusing on environmental medicine, anything that you'd like to share?
Well, I just encourage you to continue your journey of inquiry. When I was in college, I felt a calling to come to naturopathic school just simply by having read about it and always wanting to be a doctor, but not really resonating with what I was learning doctors do. So if you feel called to this medicine, just lean into the folks who are available to help you, because we're definitely excited to have you as part of our community.
Thank you so very much for coming today, for listening to our talk, and we hope to see you at another event sometime in the near future. Have a lovely day.
Okay, thank you. Bye, ladies.
Thank you.